Hey there, welcome back to Side 9. I'm Reala.
And I'm Fulm.
Our wonderful artist has finished our new logo. We've been very excited to unveil it, and while we'll miss our MS Paint glory, we look forward to really getting into covering the Gundam card game both for and with you guys.
So if you guys appreciate our new look, please let us know with a like and subscribe.
As we all know, Gundam Set 1 Newtype Rising is coming out this Friday. And what better way to celebrate the release than to showcase what we believe to be every good deck from the card game's very first full booster meta.
Of course, seeing that this game is a global release and all, these decks aren't going to be optimized right from the jump. Just because we're usually right doesn't mean we're always right.
We've got a substantial amount of games on our belt with each of the lists we're featuring here today. Feel free to take them and either run with them or make tweaks to optimize them for your local meta.
That's the beauty of a global release after all. Everyone's learning at the same time. And there's basically no better way to get games in than at your local game store. If you don't know where your closest store is, you can always find a listed store on Bandai's TCG Plus app.
With all that out of the way, let's jump into it. Every good deck from Gundam Set 1, Newtype Rising.
Thanks for that, Reala. So going forward, we figured Reala and I split up and came up with about 3 decks each coming into the new format that we're excited to try. So we figured we're kind of just going to soft interview each other about them and really get down to what we really feel makes these decks tick. To start, we're going to start with what we both believe is going to be a premier deck in the upcoming format in Freedom Control. And with this, Reala is going to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, thanks for that. Let's start talking about a deck that is definitely no stranger to any online tournament results we've seen so far, and definitely a clear front runner coming from the beta format. Like we started with the beta format, we had a blue-white deck, and turns out that one of the good contenders of this new format is a blue-white deck.
Yeah, this deck almost feels like a continuation of literally the blue-white that we saw topping beta format.
For sure. And yeah, you can definitely see some cards that are familiar here. I think we probably should just address the elephant in the room first and foremost. A Show of Resolve has a new art from the first set of the booster, but don't worry, it's still the same Show of Resolve you know and love. If you're familiar with the beta format, you'll be familiar with basically half of the contents of this deck. It's actually funny. I've started prepping my decks for the Set 1 format, and I've sleeved up this deck in particular, and I'm already like halfway there, even without any booster cards. So.
Well, see, it's funny to me that you say half the deck, because looking at this as compared to beta lists, it does seem like there's significantly different cards, because in beta, we didn't have access to the starter deck cards, so in reality, we're actually kind of pulling from 2 products here.
For sure, yeah. I think beta, just taking a look real quick, so we had Guncannon, Strike Dagger, Aile Strike, Kira, and Archangel with Show of Resolve as well. And yeah, the rest are either from starter or booster. So yeah, there is quite a lot of new ground to cover here. You're all right to observe that. Yeah, so let's just talk about a little bit about the plays that the deck is trying to make at kind of like a macro level, and then we can zoom into a bit more fun interactions that can happen throughout the game.
Yeah, so tell me how this deck wins beyond just hitting my opponent till they die.
Right. So I think the biggest thing is that, in the early to mid game, we were trying to get units out on the board that are slightly more sticky than the opponent's unit. So I'm thinking Guncannon paired with a Sayla Mass, or a Delta Plus paired with a Sayla Mass, or just anything, literally anything that is paired with Kira. And so what's going to happen is that, of course, as we know, Kira Yamato, absolute MVP of the Side 9 channel so far. Thanks for sticking with us, Kira. -2 AP to anything on attacking. And of course, Sayla Mass is just giving you more instances of repair to units. In this case, in this deck, it's giving more instances of repair to units that already have repair. And so what you're able to do with Guncannon, with an early Sayla Mass on turn 3, for instance, you can rest your most favorable trade, and then even if it's something that has 2 AP, you're going to be repairing all the way back down to full health. And so, yeah, that's what you're kind of wanting to do in the early game. You want to be able to establish a clear board dominance early on. And then, of course, what happens when your units live, you can then start targeting shields. And so this is kind of operating, this whole entire deck is operating on a board is the priority, and then you start taking shields when the board is either clear or non-threatening from your opponent's side of the board. So I think a clear MVP of this deck is Delta Plus. We're thinking a level 4, 3 cost, 4/3, 4 AP, 3 HP. It has Repair 1 by itself. It links with any Earth Federation, which is just Sayla Mass in this deck. It gets HP plus 1. So if you're going to do the whole entire link play with Sayla Mass, you're spending 4 in total. You're committing 2 cards to get a 5/5 in stats that has Repair 1, and of course has haste because it's not linked. So you're able to attack the turn it gets played.
Well, when you're pairing it with Sayla, well, I guess technically you're linking it with Sayla. When you're linking it with Sayla, you get that 5/5 stats, like you said, but it's Repair 2, right?
Yep, it's Repair 2. That's a very key point to also mention. So the Repair 1 on the Delta Plus, and of course Sayla Mass is giving that blue unit that is Pair 2 another instance of Repair 1. And so what ends up happening is that at the end of the turn, Repair 1 triggers, Repair 1 triggers, you're going to be healing 2 in total by the end of that turn. Of course, we have, just some cards that help us bridge the gap between, the early and late game, but, we have Astray, which is, kind of just a 2/2 in the early game, but is able to turn into a 3 AP, 2 HP unit with blocker if you have another triple ship alliance on your field, which is important to note that Freedom, your top end, is triple ship alliance alongside Strike Rouge. Speaking of Strike Rouge, if you liked Archangel, you will like Strike Rouge as well, so we have a whole lot of restanding blocker synergy in this deck, which is good because, we have Aile Strike Gundam and Freedom Gundam to be able to, kind of pick out a shield or pick out a unit and then be able to restand and still have the utility with your blocker. And it's just one of those cards where, hey, Strike Rouge is already a triple ship alliance. It has a good ability. Let's chuck it in to make Astray a little bit more viable here.
I will cut in a little bit, and this is the part that I helped with building the deck with Reala. It really comes down to, we were kind of big on Zawart, but it turns out that oftentimes, especially when you're playing a long game like this deck often does, hitting Zawart late game and it not being able to swing at your opponent is a big deal. And so it turns out Astray just being a Zawart that doesn't have that restriction late game wound up being super relevant.
For sure, yeah, and it's just so important as well, because of course, this deck can play attrition, it can play a long game. However, I mean, you don't want to be backed into a corner where, like, you have to, where it's like, if you can just swing shields and try to end the game, then by all means, please go for it. Speaking of that attrition, though, let's talk about some of the top end of the deck. We're not talking about Freedom just yet, but I want to talk about Gundam Aerial Rebuild. This is a really fun play pattern that I think if you spend a little bit of time behind the wheel with the deck, you'll just have so much fun with those, in the audience that are watching this. So you play your Gundam Aerial Rebuild. At some point, you would have played a Show of Resolve earlier, so whether that be on a prior turn, you play your Show of Resolve, you got your cards. Now you're going to play your Gundam Aerial Rebuild. You're going to pair your Gundam Aerial Rebuild. That's very important here. It's not when linked, it is when paired. You get to get that command back. And so you can Show of Resolve, get your cards, play Aerial Rebuild, pair Aerial Rebuild, get your Show of Resolve back, and then boom, you have ways to basically get, I don't want to say infinite cards, because obviously it is finite. As soon as you hit 0 in this game, you're dead. You lose the game, but I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a deck that is able to play a much longer game than this deck. Of course, I'd be amiss if I didn't talk about the big namesake of the deck, Freedom Gundam, as if we needed to see Kira Yamato get any better as a pilot, but we're talking a level 7, 5 cost, 4 AP with 6 HP that has blocker on its own, and then the ability during pair and once per turn, when you pair a pilot with this unit or one of your white units, you choose an enemy unit to get AP -2 during this turn. So of course you're already getting an instance of that effect with Kira, you're getting an instance of that effect with Freedom Gundam itself getting paired, you're getting an instance of that if you do the whole entire funny Gundam Aerial Rebuild play, you get to pair a pilot with that, and of course on the text of that card you want to be pairing a pilot anyway, so it's like you're getting bonus effects with your bonus effects. Oh my gosh, so much value. I am absolutely just loving this deck, and of course that kind of goes into the biggest question of just like why are you choosing individual cards to kind of like make the whole entire thing.
It just is something that has come up repeatedly as we were testing. If you're ever in a situation where you land 2 freedoms and you get both of them paired, that's basically like a win the game scenario. Something getting like -4 AP for the turn is a free trade. Combine that with Kira's giving the -2, like that's where you start looking at like Wing Gundams and just chewing them up for basically free.
Yeah, your opponent's deck becomes, candy bar, and you're gonna start gnawing at it. Like, there's absolutely no concern in the world. And so, you know, that's kind of the rationale behind the deck. You know, we're playing a long game. We're playing a long-term value-based game. I think the only card I haven't talked about yet is just that Striker Pack, and it's really hard to go wrong with that, especially cards that are modal. We have this conversation a lot just in other card games, and of course applies very much so in Gundam as well. Whenever you're given a choice on a card, it's an indication that, hey, this card, you know, is better than the alternative of just getting one option. So, like, this one, of course, has Burst, you know, summon a 3/3 blocker. You know, just having a little bit of extra resilience in your shield area is very helpful. Of course, we have the, you know, the bases as well that provide a little bit of resilience if we're playing against like aggro or something that's trying to take out shields early. But of course, if you're playing Striker Pack from hand, you get the choice between either a 2 AP 4 HP blocker or a 4 AP 2 HP blocker.
I was going to jump in on Striker Pack there. It also is very advantageous to sometimes, because sometimes you just need one more body. Having a body that Rebuild can get back, like, that comes up.
For sure. I kind of, you know, spoilers for the rest of the video, this is not going to be the first time you see Aile Rebuild in a deck list for this video.
It's not going to be the first time you see Freedom either.
Right, it's not going to be the first time you see Freedom either. But I think one thing that's very important is that, you know, I saw an early deck list that Fulm was making that had Aile Rebuild and Show of Resolve and Striker Pack, and my first intuition was kind of just, oh, I see what you're doing. You Striker Pack, you make the 4/2, you force a trade on one of their attacks, and then, oh, you do the funny thing where you get your Striker Pack back and you make the blocker, right? And of course, that is still a good, repeatable, recurable value engine. But of course, your better play, I'd say, in a lot of cases, is just going to be looping the Show of Resolve, because on average, that extra card is going to be worth more than just the individual blocker. But, you know, I've seen weirder things happen in the game of Gundam where it's like that one blocker may be exactly what you need to not die. So, of course, in those instances, the blocker is better. But
so, I do have to ask, looking at the list, though, especially compared to traditional blue-white and some of the early lists we've seen coming out, what's with the exclusion of Amuro and the RX-78?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I personally struggled with for quite a long time, either building the deck or playing the deck. And so I think the most important part to kind of talk about is just that Sayla Mass is able to link with both Guncannon, and it's able to link with Delta Plus, and it does exactly what you need it to at the point of the game in which it comes out. So you like the ability to have the unit that sticks around for longer. And so RX-78 is, you know, we initially had it in the deck without the Amuro link, because of course, you know, Sayla Mass is just an absolute long-term value play that gives you a little bit more repeatable, recurable value than just the initial rest that Amuro gives you. And so we were thinking about, you know, maybe doing kind of a hybrid approach where it's like, let's just have RX-78 within the deck, but without Amuro. And it turns out that ends up feeling a little bit underwhelming, because you're spending that 3 on turn 4 to develop your unit with, you know, pretty decent stats and still has repair, but you don't get the immediate play of linking with Amuro and resting and having Gundam RX-78 take out a unit, which is, of course, I think the most strong aspect of RX-78 starter deck as a card. And so, you know, ultimately the choice was to cut both RX-78 and the Amuro Ray. And I think one thing I think is important to highlight here is just the overall deck building philosophy we're going for with these decks. So anytime we go over the 8 pilot mark is when we enter a territory that's like, oh, it's a little bit of luck.
All right, and so just to play a little devil's advocate here, maybe make your deck look a little bad, is there any secret sauce to beating this deck?
Oh gosh, yeah. So, you know, I think decks that bring consistent top end, for example, can be a big problem for this deck. So, of course, this whole entire deck is the late game, rather. I mean, there's other things going for the deck, to be fair, but the late game is kind of just this huge freedom blowout scenario where it's like, yes, you can't touch me. You'll feel like Yamato at the end of Seed Destiny. You can't touch me. I am Jesus, right? Well, what actually ends up happening is that if your opponent's on like Unicorn Destroy mode, for example, and it's like, yeah, I'll just rest your freedom, and yeah, I'll kill it, and yeah, I'll live the exchange, right? Or like anything that has super top end like that, and is able to out your freedom pretty easily, you then kind of just sit there and go like, wait, the whole entire thing I was building for this game just got destroyed immediately. And they still got dude. And they still got pressure. Uh-oh. And then you start sweating. You break onto a cold sweat. And then that's how you're going to be losing.
I was going to say, it might be a little bit of a cop-out to say this, but yes, something to be very scared of is having your freedom get freedomed.
Yes. It's like, oh, well, what's the solution to freedom? Oh, another freedom. Oh, sure. Great. Wonderful. Thank you for that. Very, very much wow. I will say, though, I don't know exactly, the best way to bring this up, I guess, throughout the course of the video, but this is our definitive pick for, I guess, probably shouldn't say definitive, but our pick for the strongest deck we think in the meta right now.
Yeah, I do think, at the very least, I think this is probably the framework of what we'll see emerge as the strongest deck in the first booster. It definitely has weaknesses. I don't think there's like a perfect deck in the current meta. I think you'd agree with that.
Yep.
But so if we do see its weaknesses emerge, it's likely as a response to this deck being very represented. Mm-hmm. But just for those of you watching, waiting for Reala and I to feud, we pretty much agree this is probably going to be the top dog.
Which I will say, for example, as a quick aside, how cool of a deck is it for it to be the top dog? A lot of times I feel in other trading card games or metas, you take a look at the top dog and you go, yeah, it's kind of lame. I don't like it. I think the gameplay pattern is pretty boring, and and just, I don't know. There's a lot of things that you can say about metas and other trading card games. But for this one, it's like, if there is a deck to be like the best deck, it's like, okay, cool. Like, I'm fine with this deck being the best deck. It has a lot of cool things going for it. There's a lot of cool play patterns to explore.
Well, the other thing that I think is really cool about this deck, and why it doesn't feel so bad if it does wind up being the top dog, is that the deck is really its toolkit. Almost everything is a decision point in this game, and especially in this deck. And so oftentimes decisions you make early just kind of do become a decision cascade as we go along. So sometimes, the decisions you made on turn 4 is why you're losing the game here in turn 7, right? You mismanage the resources this deck gives you, but if you play it right, this deck basically has contingencies for almost everything.
For sure, yeah. And I think, the timing of some things can be a little bit tricky, because of course if you go for the whole entire rebuild play, you're basically spending your turn just to do the rebuild play, because nothing immediately links with rebuild. You're spending 5 to play at the rebuild, you're spending another 1 to do the pair, to get your show of resolve back, and then you may not even have the resources to immediately draw more or do anything else with your turn. I think there's definitely is like a lot of sequencing / timing considerations with this deck, especially with the the Archangel play patterns or the Aile play patterns and things like that. And so I'm also happy, trying to figure out exactly the best play in each given turn. And I think this deck is something that's going to take me even more games to figure out exactly how to play it, close to optimally. So looking forward to playing more games with this deck as well.
Yeah. I will have to say, in terms of dank or stank, I gotta rate this deck dank.
Thank you. Not like it was my idea. It was kind of just piggybacked off of beta and, just seeing, some community stuff as well. We took a little bit of a look at community deck lists. I guess I wouldn't say get inspiration, because I think we could have come up with this stuff even independently. But, it seems like the community is also on board with this deck being pretty strong. So it's good to have a little bit of, in science, we have peer review. It's good to have a little bit of peer review of this deck, too.
Sounds good.
We're back with another episode of Dank or Stank, a deck review show where I ask the brewer a couple questions about the deck, and then at the end, we ask the all-time important question for any card game deck builder. Is your deck dank, or is your deck stank? At the room with me, I have Fulm as always. It's just so you don't get mad at me like you did in the beta episode. Thank you, Fulm for being here.
At least you remember me this time.
Yeah, anyways, let's go. So this is blue-white Gundam Unicorn. I am happy that Fulm, kind of took the lead on brewing this. This is, I will say, just looking at the reveals, I have 4 alternate art Banagher links. I'm really excited for this archetype. And I think through that excitement, Fulm, took a little bit of, I guess, either inspiration or just, I want to help Reala out real quick and let me brew this real quick to have a unicorn deck that cooks. But, yeah, this deck is looking pretty cool. But, yeah, that's, kind of give the floor to you. And, give us a general overview of the deck and then let us know how this deck is winning games of Gundam.
As we've established with our previous deck we talked about, we think blue-white's good. And with that, we really just kind of took the bones of the previous deck and we packed a unicorn package in there. And through doing that and a lot of testing, because I will fully admit this is the deck that we have tested the most. I have probably put close to about 200 games of testing into this deck. And
sheesh.
Yeah, it's just to get a little anecdotal with it. Reala was really excited for Unicorn, and so I knew that this was a deck that we were both going to be super interested in because Unicorn Destroy Mode is, pardon my French, a sick-ass card. And so we knew that that was a deck that we were going to play, so I wanted to go ahead and get the work in to get a deck that we knew was going to perform and something that we could be confident in. And, yeah, and then suddenly I was like 50, 60 games of playtesting going, why is it so fun?
Yeah.
There's a nice little adage that Reala likes to hit me with all the time, and that is when you look at a deck list and it's all 4-ofs and 1-2-of, it's either a deck that has been hyper optimized or is a deck that hasn't been optimized at all. But genuinely, this is a build where, due to how the cards function together, due to Chuchu's Demi Trainer being a house, running 4 copies of Overflowing Affection, running 4 copies of Strike Gundam, like you can genuinely pare your deck down to like your best 20 cards relatively quickly throughout the course of the game. So just like being on as many copies of your best cards as possible winds up being wildly consistent.
For sure. And this is a deck that you look at the deck list, and I think, and maybe it's just the amount of time that we've had looking at the deck or playing the deck in your case, where it's like you look at it and you see everything operate like a Rube Goldberg machine, where it just feels like each card has clear place within the deck. Each card has a clear reason to be in the deck. There's like a couple odd choices that, of course, I questioned you on initially, and I'll go through the exercise of questioning you again for the sake of the audience, because I'm sure that the audience may be in a similar mind of where I was when I first asked questions about the deck. What's the kind of strategy of this deck, and how are you going to be winning your games through kind of this unicorn package or just the traditional blue-white package?
It's funny because you were talking about, we have 2 cards that draw and drop. Those are very specific picks. Like, it may look kind of like, we just did that because we wanted the consistency, but no, like, Strike and Choo-Choos are both houses because they are what you put up early game to keep your opponent from beating your face in while you're getting into your unicorn place. And then the utter focus of this deck is to get a Unicorn Gundam Unicorn mode played on turn 5 and then have the Benager and Destroy mode in hand ready to go for turn 6. And oftentimes that tempo swing in and of itself is enough to immediately set the tempo of the game as you then transition into playing your Freedom Gundams that are then linking with Kira's because you've used all your filters to get down to 2 to 3 copies of each.
And that's also very important to note. I'm sure that many people listening may go, well, if you just have a unicorn mode out there, shouldn't you be scared that it's going to get removed? And I then implore you to think about the type of removal that exists in Gundam so far. And the answer is actually, like, if you play a standing unicorn mode, it's like basically safe.
It's especially on turn 5.
So yeah, I just wanted to kind of dispel that, I guess, hesitancy.
Yeah, pretty much the only thing that immediately checks that play is getting Amuro Raid into something, or your opponent deciding that they're A, gonna deck Siege Ploy, and then B, gonna use it now.
Yeah, there's definitely that. Of course, you transition into destroy mode throughout the course of the game. And I mean, let's just like zoom into this card in particular. Just give us the rundown of the stats, effect, and things like that, and just how sick of a card this is.
Unicorn Gundam Destroy mode is a level 7 6 cost, but we can effectively ignore that when we get to its effect later. But to start, it's a 5 AP, 4 HP, and its effect is if you have a linked Unicorn mode, you can destroy that to play it as though it has level 0 cost. And this is actually huge, especially if you land at turn 5, because due to the fact that that's just a straight effect, it doesn't care if that unicorn mode is rested or not. So if you have one from last turn, you can essentially double up the value by swinging your unicorn mode and then transitioning to destroy mode to have a fresh standing unit. Like you either get a free trade or at the very least you get a shield out of it. And that's huge in terms of a tempo play. And then it also has the effect to on attack rest a unit. Now that sounds a little innocuous, but I mean, anybody who's been terrorized by an Amuro being paired knows that this is an innately powerful effect.
Right. Yeah, I think one thing that initially stands out is that I think for me, the first thing I thought about was, oh yeah, so if you do the double link play where you're linking unicorn mode with Banagher, you're swinging a shield, you're destroying it, you're playing the destroy mode, you're linking Banagher again, you're swinging a shield, and that's certainly a play you can do if you're trying to just like wrap up the game. You can do the double shield ping all the time. But of course, there's also versatility in the sense that, hey, like we're doing things that's resting things in the opponent's board. If you have literally anything else on board to be able to rest and deal with one of your other cards, like of course, I think if we talked about the absolute win condition of the blue-white freedom control deck earlier, which is 2 freedom.
Yeah.
The absolute win state of this deck might just be a freedom plus a unicorn destroy mode that's swinging, right?
Exactly. It also has a huge advantage just to further go into why destroy mode is such an awesome card to have. So a huge part of the control of this game right now is blockers, right? They mess up your attack patterns and it becomes very difficult to truly threaten your opponent. I mean, you see several decks when you stabilize late game, suddenly like taking damage becomes a choice. Am I just going to lose blockers? Am I going to take damage? And it can be very difficult to break that parity. Well, Unicorn mode just turns off the strongest blocker. However, it also has this amazing incidental synergy with Freedom because you can Freedom a unit even if it's standing, and then Unicorn just turns it sideways for you, and now you just get to kill it.
Yep.
It occurs to me, though, that we haven't really gone into what the combo is, so for people who aren't familiar, Unicorn mode has the ability that when it's destroyed, it can return a linked pilot to you. Banagher links, the pilot that links to it, has the ability that when it's linked, you draw one. So the way the combo works is you play Unicorn mode, you link Banagher to it, you get your card off of that link, you do what you do with your Unicorn mode, and then you use Destroy mode to sacrifice it, which will bounce the Banagher back for you, and then you link the Banagher with the Destroy mode, and you get another card back.
The first impression I had is that because there's a lot of cards involved, it is surprising to me just at the end of the day, all you're really losing is one card in terms of just like raw card advantage because, you know, you're getting that draw one off the Banagher each time. And I mean, let's just talk about Banagher for a second, just by himself, you know, win linked draw a card. Of course, we talk about, you know, the traditional value problem with just, you know, pilots condensing 2 cards into one, where it's like, okay, cool, well, your pilot's going to have to give you something back in that case. In this case, it seems like the design for Banagher Links is just, okay, fine, we'll just give you a card back. You're fine. Like, there you go. Like, you'll be on your merry way with your card.
It is worth noting that this only works with Banagher being linked. That is a huge bottleneck because he only links with 2 units in the entire game. We don't have the Kira value engine where, like, okay, cool, he does his attack thing, so he doesn't really care what he links with. Like, getting a card, very powerful, very narrow how he gets it.
Very narrow how he gets it, but I mean, it's a +2/+2, you get your card back, and so it's almost like the only cost of playing a Banagher, if it's linked, is just that one resource. And so it's great to be having that and starting to wreck house from that point onwards. You know, I want to talk about, you know, a card that seems a little bit interesting. Like, I'm taking a look at this, you know, 13th Tactical Testing Room, I believe it's called, or Sector, maybe.
13th Tactical Training Sector.
Training sector. I was so close. Oh, man, give me A for effort, okay? You know, but I take a look at that base, and I'm like, okay, well, immediately I'm thinking of a couple bases that potentially could provide more value, like White Base or Archangel even. We don't have a whole lot of blockers. It is just Freedom in this deck, but yeah, why do you choose this one in particular? Okay,
so I would love to give you this really protracted, really thought out answer. It's because it's a 1-cost base. So 1-cost base, 5 HP, that's the primary reason it's here. Now we are playing Chuchus and Michaelis, so it's not, and technically rebuild, although oftentimes when we're in rebuild, we're not playing bases anymore. So technically it's not that hard to get an Academy unit on board and still get value out of this base, but it's largely because it's a 1-cost base. White base costing 2 is almost prohibitively expensive, just often based on how we're spending our resources. White base costing 4 to get full value out of it on the turn you play it is just a complete non-starter.
For sure, yeah. And one thing I will say, I played Seed, the starter deck, throughout like a lot of my starter deck events. And sometimes nothing feels better than spending 1, getting a base to protect the rest of your shields, and basically getting a free filter off of it, being able to draw that card, from shields. And I imagine that part of the play pattern of this is just, we're a deck that likes to filter and see more cards. It might be from this base that gets us exactly what we need, and we're not spending that much resources to do it. So given that context, I think that makes sense.
If it weren't for aggro knocking all the teeth out of my head, I would absolutely run no bases.
Yeah. What's your vibe check on the general skill ceiling of the deck? Because I think one thing that's easy to mess up, and one thing that I'm going to have to check myself, making sure I'm making the right decisions on, is how many draw discards we have. I think there's a lot of windows to just discard the wrong card, especially, with our Overflowing Affections, Chuchus, Strike Gundam, just to name all the draw discards of the deck. What are your thoughts on the skill ceiling? Do you feel like it's pretty, after having 200 games, do you think it's pretty easy to tell what your worst card in your hand is, or is that, still a struggle for you at the moment?
It's definitely a decision. Oftentimes, the discards you make because of how your turn sequence, it's the looking at what's in your hand and going, what am I going to play next turn? What am I going to play 2 turns from now? How long is this Chuchu's going to live? Am I going to be able to keep getting the effect off of it? Because if so, I don't have to be super attached to these cards. If it's going to die next turn, then I need to look at okay, these are the cards that I'm going to be stuck with for the next 2 turns. And so it absolutely is a decision. The other real skill check of this deck, something that's consistently surprised me, is outside of that core conceit of, have unicorn mode, slam it down turn 5. Every other turn is, how am I spending my resources? Am I spending my resources correctly? Because this is the kind of deck where you absolutely can. You can spend all of your resources every turn, and if you misspend them, you don't get to take it back.
Right. It's it seems like there is definitely a learning curve to this deck, and then eventually you'll get to a point where you're pretty comfortable with the decisions. Let's talk about, we've been hyping up this deck this whole entire time. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about the deck's true weakness. What deck are you going to be sitting across the table from and go, this deck isn't necessarily well tuned for this particular matchup? What deck are you thinking of when it comes to that scenario?
So there's a variant of control coming out that's red-blue that we're calling ping control, and this deck keeps me up at night, largely because it can just sweep away what I'm using to protect my face early, and it becomes really difficult to recover that tempo. Like, a Kshatriya just sniping out 2 Chuchu's Demi trainers is back-breaking.
Right. I'd imagine it feels like the game is pretty hard to recover from that point onwards.
Yeah.
That being said, suppose that blue-red ping control becomes a force in the meta. Are you willing to make any compromises in the deck list and go, well, yes, Chuchu's best for our overall strategy in the blind, but I really got to adapt to this ping control strategy? Do you think you're willing to make a couple deck building concessions to shore up that matchup, or is it just too early to tell sort of question with that one?
It depends on distinctly how prevalent ping control becomes. If aggro is very prevalent and we really need to start getting in under that, then we start making the concession of maybe I'm replacing Striker Pack for the Chuchu pilot command, because that allows me to do negative AP, or potentially just link my Chuchu's Demi Trainer to immediately start getting my filter off of it. We can also change the ratios. Maybe we're on less strikes and we're on a little bit more Michaelis, because it is pretty easy to get 4 commands in the trash, and Michaelis being a 4/4 for 2 is just incredibly relevant.
Sure, yeah, Overflowing Affection gets you, half the way there if you just got a command with it. So
yeah, especially if we put in the Chuchu command, because since it's a command pilot, it's very easy to get that in on a Chuchu's Demi Trader, have it die, and that's 2 cards in the yard, one of them is a command.
That's cool. Yeah, we can definitely alter the deck list to make it a little bit less frail in that instance.
I will also say, right now we're really heavy on rebuild, because due to how Overflowing Affection works, how Strike Gundam works, they don't actually generate card advantage. So late game, you do wind up wanting to use your rebuilds to get your Show of Resolves to actually like get your card advantage back up, have more cards to play. But it can choke you up. Not a huge deal in the deck because of the filter we use. We just discard the ones we don't need. But that is something that we can cut down to make more space for other potential tech options.
Yeah. Are you ever worried about decking out with this strategy, or in your experience, does the game end long before that 0 card in deck becomes a real problem?
I frequently get down to single digits left in deck, but generally deck out isn't a concern, usually because once we get down to single digits, it's I'm dead or they're dead now. Like, that's just how it is.
Right. It's like, if you've resolved several unicorn combos throughout the course of the game and you still haven't killed them, that's on you, buddy.
Yeah, if I'm out of freedoms and they aren't dead, scoop them up, we're going home.
Right. Cool. I guess the last question, I think you touched on this a little bit, but we'll just ask it anyways. What was your biggest struggle just getting this pile of 50 cards? Like, did you have any deck building problems or dilemmas you had to work through to get to this final 50?
I kind of like lucky accident into having basically what was going to be my final build up front, especially, given the 4 ratios that you see. But the biggest struggle in really settling on this list was kind of just accepting that this deck's going to have bad early game and I just need to play to not lose in the early game, as opposed to what I've really been playing up to this point, which is like, no, I want to take control of the board from like turn 2, right? And instead of just going you get to have a couple dudes. Yeah, I'll throw away a couple of my shields. It's fine. When we hit late game, I'm just going to turn the momentum of the game around.
Yeah, and that's completely fine. We actually will see another deck in this video that that plays for a similar sort of scenario that happens. Turning the corner is very real in card games, and once you're able to shut down their aggression or their board or their game plan or whatever, you can feel pretty comfy from that point onward. And of course, the joy of having 6 shields in this game, or a very popular aphorism from players of other trading card games, is that the only shield that matters is your last one. And in the case of this game, your last one doesn't even matter. It's the fact that you have 0 shields and you're taking a hit. So life is a resource for sure, as trite as that is to say at this point in time. But if you can turn the game around with a couple shields remaining, hey, you're still getting it in before the bell. So I think that's important to note as well with decks that have to turn the corner like this. Sweet, yeah, this deck is awesome. I think I'm most excited for it this meta. I think it wouldn't be a stretch to say that you're most excited for it this meta. Do you have any other last thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I do actually want to say that, like, while the absolute focus of this is Unicorn, and we thought Unicorn was cool, through testing, like, this deck is incredibly viable. Like, I actually generally think it has a positive matchup into the Freedom Control, just by nature of Freedom Control struggles to deal with a Unicorn Destroy mode. And then, as we said, one of the best ways to kill a Freedom is to play your own Freedom, which is what this deck does, and it's even more consistent at getting into Freedoms. This is a deck where when we hit late game, like, your top decks are generally good, or they just get you 2 more good cards, whereas other decks are going to be like, oh, I top decked a Strike Dagger, oops.
I'm looking for us to get clipped and shipped at some point, Fulm. Are you willing to make the bold claim that there is a potential that this version of Blue-White is better than the other version of Blue-White that we featured earlier?
If enough of the first version of Blue-White shows up, absolutely. There is probably enough aggro in the format for me to sign off on this being the absolute undisputed best deck, because you can absolutely lose games to aggro. But if people say towards more mid-range / more control-y things, I think this deck just start slapping people down.
Yeah, and if you're playing against aggro, just burst striker pack, you'll be fine, easy.
Anyways. Just put all 4 bases in your shield zone, easy peasy.
All right, I think very importantly, I'm not forgetting it this time. I almost forgot it at the end of our beta video. Is your deck dank or is your deck stank? I mean, given the amount of games that you put into it and just seeing all the synergies and the strategies, I think it's fair to say your deck is pretty dank. Hey everyone, Reala here. Welcome back to Is Your Deck the Dankiest or Is Your Deck the Stankiest? Is thy decketh thy Shakespeare thy danketh orest thy stank. I don't know where I'm going with that one. Anyway, we're back for Deku Stank, another one. Now, we talked about some cool brews, some decks that took a little bit of time to put together, and not to undersell the amount of time that this particular deck took, but sometimes in trading card games, there are developer-intended archetypes where they give you a pile of cards that say a particular trait on them. I think Yu-Gi-Oh's notorious for this, with their archetypes in this game. But in Gundam, we are taking a look at the traits of the cards. And, we have Star Deck 3 Zeon's Rush, and there's a clear upgrade pathway for Zeon's Rush within the booster Newtype Rising. So, hey, we were given this on a silver platter, and so let's talk about it. This is what we like to call Neon Rush.
Which, of course, we call it Neon because it's Zeon and Neo Zeon, and we're not going to repeat that every time both those names come up.
Yeah, you've seen the length of this video. We don't want it to be even longer than what it's already at. So, please spare us the comments.
And for those of you in the audience, I do have to preemptively apologize. We think this deck is great. We think this deck is awesome. I actually unironically do love this deck. We're going to sound pretty unserious because I have sent Reala so many memes about this deck.
Yep. It's if you it's one of those things where I guess you just had to have been there for it. But yeah, we definitely shoot the shit all the time when it comes to this deck. But it is very strong. We've talked about Sinanju, and we've talked about Zeon's Rush as a starter deck, and this is the clear upgrade pathway for it. But yeah, let's This is literally like the Neo Zeon and Zeon start deck, the Zeon's Rush start deck.
It's that, but better. The pickup of Kshatriya from the booster does so much because it lets you just snipe out other aggro boards. Having more targets for Char. Char is just honestly an amazing pilot. Giving something high maneuver when he's linked with it just means that you get to just kill your opponent's bases over and over again. And they have to look at you and be like, okay, I guess I have to swing at your dudes. And when they do that with your Char linked units, you either get your card back or you get a token. So it's like, oh, cool. The number of cards in play didn't change despite the fact that my dude just died.
This deck absolutely cracks me up in terms of deck construction. It's like, okay, cool. Let's take the good cards from the starter deck. Okay, cool. They're in the deck. Oh, awesome. Let's take a look at the cards from the booster set. Oh, what's in the top corner of the card? Oh, it says LR. Ooh, put those in the deck. And then you round it out with like the leftover cards, that you need to round out, a curve / strategy / deck list, and like you ship it. And of course,
it sounds so unserious, and then you're playing against it and you see the Sinanju Char's Gelgook hit the board at the same time, and it's like, oh wow, I have real problems now. Like, how do I out that? I gotta fix that fast.
Yeah, if only they follow it up with Shamblo or something, man, that would just be truly a nightmare.
So Reala is bound and determined that this is a terrible card. I made an entire PowerPoint showing him why Shamblo is actually a good card. Like, it may not immediately read it. It may immediately read it's just like a big bungus, but it links with every pilot in your deck. It is not hard in this deck to get 2 rested things on board, and suddenly the 3 damage pings can create an environment where it's like next to impossible to come back from. Like, Freedom gets 3 damage pinged, and suddenly it just trades with anything it tries to block.
I'm sorry, I just refuse to believe a card that labels himself as a sham and that he blows is actually a good card. It's in the title. Yeah, so we can be bickering about it. It's just a 2-of in this deck, though. It doesn't, take it or leave it sort of thing. I think is firmly where I'm at with it. There are undeniably board states where Shamblo is a good card. I just don't know if that is all of them. But to, I guess, steer us back in the right direction. We've been having some fun, we've been having some laughs, but of course you're here for the juicy deck building considerations and content. Let's talk about just the macro level of this deck. How are we winning with Zeon Rush?
Essentially, the way this deck wins is you just consistently punch your opponent in the mouth until you have to divert to something else. Like, you only deal with your opponent's most threatening things, and it's because you just can consistently create units with high maneuver. So you just go base, go shield, go base, go shield, And if you're outpacing your opponent, they are put in a position where, because their clock is shorter, they have to swing at your dudes. And unlike a traditional aggro thing, your dudes still have decent stats behind them. Like, there's a non-zero that they just trade. And so you got shields, and your opponent didn't get shields when both of your units die. And so you just essentially create that environment over and over. And then late game, you put Char Aznable on a Shamblo, put the Shamblo in the air, and just smash that into your opponent's final shield and or face.
And I think it wouldn't be a stretch to say that very early on, with just, less testing and more vibes-based approach to the deck build and the meta game, I think at different points we were both considering, is Zeon Rush just the best deck in this format? And I think we can both pretty confidently say no nowadays, because there are some glaring weaknesses in this deck. And I want to first draw our attention to us breaking the cardinal sin that we talked about as a deck building principle or philosophy in our first section, where we talked about freedom control. We're on 12 pilots. Do you run into the pilot issue with this deck? And if so, is that game state recoverable?
So, absolutely, drawing too many pilots just kind of kills you. It will choke your momentum. You start running into the situation of, okay, I have to top deck units. The good news here is that generally your units link. Char links with 3 different cards here. Both of your pilots link with Shamblo. You absolutely will link every Kshatriya that you ever pull, because its on-pair ability to deal 1 to things actually really matters. It very quickly just turns into an environment where things just start dying off because they just keep taking incidental damage. But the biggest reason that we're there is because Full Frontal is a level 6 pilot. He comes out pretty late.
I've seen this in starter deck events. People have talked about it. I didn't get to play Zeon's Rush nearly as much as I wanted to, but I've played against Zeon's Rush enough to where, the opponent kind of has the bad beats of drawing in too many full frontals, and they slap their hand on the table at the end of the game. They show me 3 full frontals, and I have to look at them in the eyes and go, buddy, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to cut your deck in this way. My bad. Did you even consider cutting Maria Cruz at any point, or is she just too essential to give up?
I think she's a little too essential to give up. If you looked at me and you said you have to change 1 card in the deck, right? Even if it makes the deck worse, we're gonna force you to change 1 card. I would probably consider cutting Goof for the rare Kshatriya, just to make sure that I have another target for Brita Cruz to link. Her ping on swing is actually genuinely game winning. So many incidental things die to that. Being in an environment.
Goodbye Chuchu's Demi Trainer, goodbye Charzaku 2 token, goodbye.
Yeah.
Goodbye 1.
Or it lived 2 turns, goodbye Strike Dagger, And then there's so many times absolutely we take trades in this game where it's hey, my dude's gonna live with 1 HP and you still have to deal with him. And Burrito Cruz says, no, I don't.
I totally get that. Yeah, honestly, I don't know if there's too much else to say. This deck is, very strong. It is also very straightforward in its gameplay, so.
I will say, this is probably the scariest deck to play against when they hit the nut draw.
Yeah. Sinanju, Gelgoog, Link Char. Oh my gosh, I'm having nightmares just thinking about it. Yeah, and I think that's a real consideration. Are you willing to call this the high roll deck of the format? Are you willing to go that far? What are you thinking of that?
I don't really want to call it a high roll deck, because that kind of implies that, this deck isn't very good until it hits the nuts. This is a very competent deck. If we are saying the previous 2 decks are the best 2 decks, I mean, this deck can still, it doesn't take it getting amazing draws and them getting terrible draws. You just need to draw slightly better or be a slightly better player. This deck can absolutely take games off the decks that we're calling better decks. So it's still an entirely competent strategy on its own.
For sure. Yeah, very, very short, simple, and sweet on this one, but I think that's about it for Zeon's Rush. Any last thoughts or words?
Shamblo is a good card, and it absolutely will turn late game games on its head, and Reala is coping because he thinks otherwise.
Due to creative differences, our Side 9 broadcast has been interrupted. Your deck is dank, by the way. It's pretty good.
Welcome back to Side 9. I'm Fulminatus. Welcome to my brand new segment called Dank or Stank, where I talk with a deck builder about their deck and we determine whether their deck is dank or stank. In the studio with me today is Reala.
See, I find it funny how you're calling it your brand new segment, although this segment's been around for a little bit, buddy.
Should have filed the patent on it first.
I'm sorry. My bad. Hey, Wing Gundam on Toonami was pretty cool, right?
Hey, let me tell you, this deck is just a wild beat. But so, let's talk about the resident true control deck of this format.
A quick few things just about the general style of the deck. So this is operating on a ramp principle that we see in many other card games. We have cards that give us more resources. Let's first talk about Wing Gundam Bird Mode, 3 costs, level 3, 2 AP, 2 HP that says place an EX resource. Of course, an EX resource is not as good as just a full-on resource, but it gives us more access to more levels earlier on within the game. Of course, we also have Gundam Death Scythe. When it is paired with an Operation Meteor Pilot, you get to place a resource and gain first strike. That is awesome. Being able to have a actual resource on a unit that, you know, you get an actual resource, you get a unit, you have first strike. If you're linking it with Duo Maxwell, it can immediately attack. I think that's like the true spotlight of this deck, and potentially players right now are putting the spotlight on the wrong card. Are we going to start off this segment with a bit of a hot take section? Perhaps.
Listen,
we need to address the elephant in the room. We need to address the elephant in the room with this deck list. We do not have starter deck Wing Gundam in this deck. And I'm sure the first thought is, why is it that we don't have the starter deck Wing Gundam in this deck? You know, I think there's a few reasons. I think we should probably just start off with, you know, the most obvious, you know, just being a deck building consideration. Of course, at the same time, we're going to be dropping our Wing Gundam. There's also going to be a time that we're dropping our Death Scythe. So, like, if we're talking about a clear bridge from Death Scythe over to that Gundam Wing Zero, where we're truly turning the corner, as we talked about earlier in this video. You know, if we want to do that bridge, Death Scythe is the bridge that's going to get you there. And of course, Wing can do the thing where it breaches and attacks an enemy unit, but it doesn't quite finish the job of a full board wipe quite as efficiently as Wing Gundam Zero. Now, of course, there's a few other reasons for, you know, why we're thinking Wing Gundam Star Deck is a little bit less than stellar right now, but, you know, I feel like it's best to, you know, kind of refer back to my trusty co-host who has been a Wing hater since day one. You know, what are a few other reasons why you are not liking Wing Gundam in this deck and also in this format?
So I think, generally speaking, Breach is just overcosted. Like, units with Breach just don't function as people generally tend to think they do. Like, it's awesome. You know, this unit takes a trade, still pressure shield, right? But, like, if you're taking trades and killing their dudes, then your units will eventually take shields regardless. So you're spending the power budget of your card on Breach as opposed to other effects. And then it has the ability to target level 4 or lower units. That's great, but we're playing his bigger brother later on that is just gonna kill them. And so that's less of a value add. And then it essentially just turns into, I play my Wing Gundam, he kills like 2 things, pops 2 shields, and then that's about it. And I generally think that they're just better value adds. They're better cards to top deck. And in almost every aspect of the game, like, there is a card that is as good, better, sometimes just slightly worse, without running an issue of like, oh, I have my wing and no hero to link with it, and it just kind of sits there.
Right. I mean, it's true. Almost like, think about it for a second. What's the difference between a unit like that has Kira on it, for example, that is able to take its good trade, it's able to eat its 2 AP unit for free, and then it'll attack shield in the following turn, versus a unit that does it all in one. And of course, if you're not in like a rush, if you're not trying to immediately close out the game, the answer is, well, there's basically no difference. It's just that it happens a turn later. You know, of course, there's like shield pressure and things to consider within this game, but generally speaking, there's not a problem with just waiting the full turn cycle to make your good trade, then to attack shield after you've made the good trade. And so, yeah, I think that's where we're starting with it.
Also, not to undersell it, but 9 times out of 10 that I would play Wing, let's just play Death Scythe to pair something to it. You know, if we're if we have to say we're playing the Link anyway, then we're linking Death Scythe, and then it's, like a 6/6 or a 7/5 that has first strike, kills something, and then still exists as a 7/5 or 6/6.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot more cannons and worms that we can go into, and of course, we could be incorrect on this. Maybe there's more testing and consideration to be done. Of course, you've seen the disclaimer at the bottom of the screen the whole entire video. So maybe this deck will settle back on wing again. We wanted to try a deck list that cut wing, and of course, has a lot of the late game synergistic packages that we see. I think one thing that is a card that's worth talking about is just the booster pack Shenlong Gundam. We talked about it in our starter deck video, but it seems to be just as good of an inclusion here. So we have a 3-3 split of our pilots because Chang Wufei links with the Shenlong Gundam. It has Breach 4, so it still gives you that Breach ability that we've been coveting, quite honestly been shit talking a little bit throughout this section of the video. But on attack, you get to choose an MU with blocker that is level 3 or lower and destroy it. And so if you're trying to have more destruction or be able to kill the deck, a heavy white blocker based deck, Shenlong Gundam is kind of your card to be able to break through and breach through the defenses if you're willing to accept the pun there as well. And so seeing that 3-3 pilot split is definitely a nice change of pace and a welcome addition to our don't go over 8 pilots rule. We're going over 8 pilots, but we just got one more, so it's fun. Of course, we're having cards that filter a bit more, so Chuchu's Demi Trainer, Strike Gundam, we've talked about in previous sections. St. Gabriel Institute giving us access to take a look at top 2, put one on top, one on bottom, gets us to the key pieces we need a little bit more.
And just to pick your brain on it, why specifically are we filtering for the key pieces? Like, is there a reason that we need to see specific cards on specific turns?
Yes, so I think this deck's strongest play pattern is to be able to play Wing Gundam Bird Mode at some point earlier in the game, to be able to set up our Gundam Death Scythe a bit earlier. So if we go second and we play a Wing Gundam Bird Mode, we're able to do it on our 4th turn basically, because we have those 2 AX resources. And then if you want to pair, you can burn that EX resource or do it the full turn later to set up your Wing Gundam 0 play. I think early on in this game, in this deck rather, you are in fully committed to the I just don't want to die mode. Your eventual inevitability in the deck is to play Wing Gundam 0 and to reset the board state to 0, outside of 0 himself, obviously. And then from that point onward, that's when you do the whole entire quote-unquote turn the corner thing, where you then have more control of the game. You still have cards in your hand because you didn't really play a whole lot in the early game, just enough to kind of skirt by, and then you have some links, you have some good pairs and things like that to be able to take control of the game from that point onward. But this deck, by the way, feels really, really spooky. If you are not used to living under pressure of your shields getting destroyed and you thinking, I may not be able to live, you gotta get used to that feeling a little bit, buddy, if you want to play Wing, because yes, your opponent will put you down to very, very uncomfortable situations in terms of feeling like you don't really have control of the game.
Yeah, definitely something that I was absolutely noticing in our playtesting. Just so everybody's aware, Reala has done the bulk of his playing Seed Strike style decks and blue-white, and so he is absolutely used to playing cards for the purposes of controlling the board. And so as he was getting into this game, you could see how uncomfortable he was just like letting the opponent's board amass for the purposes of just getting a cleaner wipe on Wing 0.
Yeah, it puts yourself it kind of like, I wouldn't say it forces you to play counterintuitive, but I mean kind of that, in the sense that you are betraying some fundamental aspects of playing a value resource / card advantage based card game like this by letting that happen. And it's all just in service of that final Wing 0, like, let me reset this state and simplify the board state for the purposes of being able to win this game.
But man, it feels good when that Wing 0 kills 3 or 4 cards just for hitting the board.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like card feel perspective, just in terms of what feels the best, I think, you know, Unicorn Cooks is probably the top, like, best feel for me in terms of just being able to pull off something. Wing Zero is definitely a close second. It is a one-card, self-contained board reset that is either underrated or overrated, depending on which sector of the community you're talking to. But, you know, I'm still willing to say that overall it's pretty underrated, just because I feel like it's still playing second fiddle to that Star Deck Wing Gundam that people are talking about so much. So, Wing Zero is where it's at.
Just to clear the air on it, what does Wing Zero do?
Yeah, so Wing Zero is, I believe, the highest level in cost in the game. I don't know if you want to do a quick fact check.
It is the combo of the two. It is tied in level with Shamblo.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You're bulk rare. Oh, that's right. Sorry. I like to forget that card exists, by the way. The set is 129 cards. But anyways, Wing Gundam Zero has high maneuver, so of course it can't be blocked. That is, like, probably the least relevant part of the card, where it's like, okay, whatever, like...
On an innate 5 attacker, it feels nice, though.
Yeah, it sure does. But the real reason you play is that on deploy, it will deal 3 damage to all units that are level 5 or lower. Granted, if you take a look at some of the deck lists that we feature in this video, and you look at the levels of the cards, oh, that's like a lot of most of the decks that we're going to be talking about or going over here. So, Wing Gundam Zero definitely has a very wide range of things that I can hit. And you can see it in the art where he's dual wielding that rifle. He's just going and just like shooting down the entire board. It absolutely feels great if you're able to pull this guy off. Granted, you know, the whole entire deck is getting up to this guy. Level 8 cost, definitely nothing to sneeze at. You gotta get some bird modes and some death sights to get you more resources in order to be able to pull this guy off.
That sounds good. So I do wonder, though, you know, you talk about how risky it feels to let the board build up. Are there any matchups that you were really feeling the pressure under, like matchups that just get away from this deck?
Yeah, I mean, we have yet to talk about like a pure aggro list on this video yet, but anything that can effectively go under this wing strategy is just very much uncomfortable and also pretty hard to win, right? So like, we built this deck, you know, with like a couple blockers, you know, a couple things that can contest board early. However, a deck that's like purely just trying to slap its hand onto the table every single turn, we don't have that much stuff that can test the board early. We have a little bit, you know, we have early Death Sights and Chuchu's Demi and Zowart, and, you know, there's a fair amount at the lower end of the curve. But if the opponent is playing for maximum efficiency, maximum stat efficiency, maximum shield hitting capacity, it's possible the game is just over before we get to Wing Zero, and that is just a fact that you have to accept.
Also, sometimes I noticed that you were struggling to hit your ramp.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because some of this ramp is a little bit questionable, we didn't have first contact just because it's a tempo loss and you're getting their resource, but you aren't really doing anything to contest that early board, so it further contributes to your problem of if your opponent is playing a more aggressive strategy, you're just going to have your shields get eaten and not really have an opportunity to claw back into the game. But because of that, we also run into a new problem where bird mode is ramp in the sense that it helps you get level, but it's only EX resource, and Death Scythe is a 6/4, level 6/4 cost that needs to be paired with an Operation Meteor, so it's like kind of a 2-card combo in that sense. But because we don't have the first contact, we're only on 8 pieces of ramp, and half of those ramp are only quasi-ramp. And so if you don't see those pieces, you're just really, really hurting. You are fumbling with your low end of the curve, trying not to die, and if you have to wait even a turn longer not to die before you get that Wing Zero drop, the game might already be over.
And so, obviously, you know, we already did our round of smack talk about why we didn't include Wing, but I am curious, especially in the pilot lineup, like, is there a reason that we landed on these cards specifically, even maybe specifically the ratio of, like, why we're running 3 of each?
Yeah, I mean, we have links at different stages of the game. You know, of course, Wing Zero is, if you can afford it, you want to try to be able to link that as soon as possible. Either to clear the threshold on a level 5 or a higher than level 5 unit that didn't get killed, or maybe even like, I mean, let's say like an Aile Gundam, for example, that doesn't quite get fully cleared by the Wing Gundam Zero ability. So being able to get your Wing Gundam Zero attacking ASAP is important. So, you know, we have Hero there in very desperate situations where you just have to live. I mean, you could do it on bird mode, But that's like, when desperate times call for desperate measures.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't Hero linked to Wing Zero? Isn't that like the biggest unit in the game?
Oh yeah, it's the absolute biggest. Of course, Hero is providing +3, +2 in stats, and Wing Zero is a 5/7 on its own. So when linked with Wing Gundam Zero, you are in total a 8 AP, 10 HP unit. And we're in the territory where like the opponent has to deal, or you have to like trade into like 3 things before Wing Zero finally kicks the bucket. And so outside of Hero, we have Duo Maxwell. It is the best pair, or I guess it's not even a pair because it is a link to Death Scythe. And so when we're talking about getting back in the game earlier, Duo Maxwell is the best unit to pair to the Death Scythe. I think this is like the one pilot that I would consider going to 4 in this deck, because that first strike plus resource play is so strong with Death Scythe that missing it may put you behind even further. So I consider playing another Duo Maxwell, maybe cutting a Wu Fei or something. But
and also like it, not for nothing, linking our rare Death Scythe is still absolutely worth doing. Having a 5/5 with haste and repair 1 is nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah, you can feel like you're playing Delta Plus with like not actually playing Delta Plus. So, I mean, that's fun. That's a fun play pattern for sure. And of course the Wu Fei is also important because, like, well, one, it's an Operation Meteor pilot, so like doing the pair with Death Scythe is worse, but still, like, you still get access to the resource, so that's fine on that end. If you want to take down some blockers, you can do that. And of course, Wu Fei just does the thing where you are able to trade more efficiently. So in that late game scenario where like you're just trying to turn the corner and just like keep your things on board, as long as your unit has breach, it can't receive battle damage from units with real SAP. So imagine just eating things like food and breaching and like doing your whole entire thing, where you're just like keeping your unit at full stats, keeping it nice and healthy.
So in a similar vein to talking about the pilot lineup, was there anything that you just like really struggled to hone in as you were building this deck?
Yeah, we started on blue, mainly just from the initial obvious draw of a Show of Resolve, but our list ended up looking very, very green. Abadai. No, on blue. It didn't look very blue. We had 8 total slots that were blue. We had the level 2 cost 2 blocker from the starter deck in there, and then 4 copies of a Show of Resolve. What actually paradoxically kind of ends up being the case is that because you're not playing a whole lot in the early game, you're just playing enough to kind of sustain, and you have bursts and things like that. What ends up happening is that you don't really need that card draw to sustain your late game, because by the time you get to it, you have plenty of cards that have been waiting, just sizzling in your hand on the grill, just waiting to be played. And so eventually we took this route with it that has a bit more white synergy. We play a couple blockers, we play a couple cards that are good at taking early trades or just early filter and things like that. And we felt a lot more comfortable with the list ever since. And
yeah, I definitely feel like funny enough, the bottom end that white provides is what really like plugs what the deck needs.
Which is funny because when we think about white, we think about like the bombastic like Freedom or Justices, or just that top end of the curve there. Yeah, so kind of funny that we have the lower end of white be helpful as well.
And so we've given a power evaluation on a few of these decks, but I think a lot of people will be really curious. Like, where do you think this deck lands? Like, do you think this is a really strong deck?
I'm feeling that this deck, bringing out my Fantano rating system, I'm feeling a strong 6 to a light 7. I think this deck is kind of in the middle of the pack when it comes to the meta game so far. If it fumbles and fails to draw its ramp pieces, it's going to have a hard time turning the corner. There's definitely a lot of cool design space within the deck. I'm glad that the ramp exists within the game. I think it needs a little bit more ramp pieces to eventually settle in and feel like it's a fully realized and fully competitive archetype.
That makes sense to me. And after reviewing the list, especially on Wing Zero plays, I do have to say, I think your bunker is secure and your deck is dank.
Hello everyone, I'm Midnight Reala, and welcome to Dank or Stank as a show, if it were lame. This is the new version of the show called Is Your Deck Good or Is Your Deck Bad? Good or Bad? ? In the room with me, I have the one, the legendary, the ping control builder, Fulminatus.
Hi.
Is your deck good or is your deck bad? Let's get into it.
My deck is good. Moving on.
I'm taking a look. I'm taking a look at these cards and I'm going, what is even happening? So please answer this first question for me, Fulminatus. What is even happening with this deck?
Ping damage, buddy. It's all about ping damage. So I know that you're very familiar with blue-white. And for those of you in the audience, this is essentially the second time that Reala has ever seen this list. So every question you hear from him is genuine.
Yeah, what's going on? Like, what am I looking at? Please tell me. Inform me.
So this is essentially the basis of what I think most, at the very least, kind of mid-range blue-red builds are going to look like. And something that is very interesting is we kind of vibed out early on that we didn't think blue-red was very good. There wasn't a lot of synergistic pairing between the two, and they both kind of dead-ended against each other. But then through testing, I very quickly learned that in the way that blue-white looks to make units like very sticky using things like repair and making tricky trades with blocks, blue-red instead does the opposite and uses ping damage to make units very unsticky.
Yeah, I think one thing that's in a really weird spot right now, and I think that we've independently gone back and forth on, is ping damage overcosted? Is ping damage... I don't think we ever considered ping damage undercosted. Is ping damage overcosted, or is ping damage costed exactly where it should be? Because we are right to observe that if your unit is getting pinged, you don't have to dedicate the swing to it. You're not going to be losing any of your stats of your own. So it's kind of like AP minus in a sense. However, you still have the unit there to be able to swing shields, and I think that's a very worthwhile consideration in terms of just speeding up the tempo of the game in your favor. And so yeah, where do you land on that? Do you think ping is costed about where it should be right now? Do you think it has room to grow as a mechanic? What are your thoughts on that?
I think, especially early evaluations of ping, it absolutely was overcosted. Like, just there's no two ways about it. 2 resources into a close combat to deal 2 damage is just not a great rate, even though I do think close combat is good, especially due to its action timing. However, this deck gets around that by having things like Kshatriya just doing the ping for getting paired, Marita Cruz just pinging whenever you swing, Sinanju, which is a unit that we've both been really big on, just dealing 2 damage for hitting a shield card.
Yeah, and it's really interesting here because this deck feels like it's the red half of Zeon's Rush, and the blue half kind of feels like just slightly phoned in, where it's like, yes, we're playing a Total Resolve. Good card, gets you more cards. Result, decent vanilla, it's a decent vanilla, we'll play it. And then, tell me a little bit about this Unicorn, I guess both Banshees, right? They're both labeled as Banshee.
Yep.
Both the LR and the Rare. I guess we can start with the Rare and build up to the LR, which I think, a lot of people have been excited about on the reveal. But yeah, let's start with the Rare first.
So, Banshee Unicorn mode is a weird inclusion, and it was actually a very late addition to the deck. I really needed something to fill that curve point that was synergistic. And so, you start looking at, what links, what has a good pairing. And because it specifically pairs, it specifically links with Cyber Newtypes, it links with both of our pilots. And then it gives us the Amuro Ray effect. And so it lets us take very valuable trades with a unit that becomes a 6/4. So that is why it bridges that gap between the early game and late game and does give us a powerful payoff effect.
I'm sure if you don't have a Sinanju in hand, putting a full frontal on this guy feels pretty good.
Yes.
Still.
And
you'd rather the Sinanju, but this is still fine.
And it's more targets to link with Marita Cruz, and that's a huge part of the core of this deck, is just anything I have a Marita Cruz linked to deals 1 when it goes sideways.
Pew, 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 pew. Alright, let's talk about Banshee Destroy mode, the LR, and also its interesting inclusion as only a 2-of in this deck. Where are you feeling? Where is that coming from, and what does this card do?
So, Banshee Destroy being a 2-of, I think pretty much any deck that's going to run this, you're almost universally going to see it as a 2-of, because it is the premier example of a card that generally only hits the board once. Like, it works when you play it, and then the game ends. That's just kind of how the card operates. So by that nature, there's not a huge incentive to run multiple copies. And it actually genuinely plugs a gap when you're hitting that end of the game, where you and your opponent are starting to get into that top deck phase. Its ability to just shove 12 back into deck and swing twice with first strike oftentimes can be the thing that just ends the game. Like, it can take that last shield and hit your opponent in the face. It can just kill 2 things because it has 7 AP. Like, it's killing a wing and Shenlong, which are like 2 big things that you're looking at. And it does it for free. It doesn't lose anything to do that. Marita's pinging twice when that happens. It turns into that card that, like, once you resolve it, like, that's the point where the game just kind of ends, even if it doesn't end right that second.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of the good decks in the game right now, I mean, outside of like Freedom Control, for example, have this kind of like, if the stars align or if you draw it late game, you kind of have the, oh wait, I win, cool. And so in Zeon's Rush, it's the Sinanju Gelgu play. In the Unicorn deck, it's having the full Unicorn line where they have 1 shield, you're good to go. And this deck is the Banshee Destroy, although this one has a little bit more conditions to get there. And you know, we'll talk about Justice a bit later. I'm not looking forward to it, but that has the potential to kind of do the same play pattern. And like, I mean, that actually has me on a new question, and this is just, you know, interesting just for deck building in general, where it's like, do you think that's going to be a core, I guess, design conceit going forward when it comes to deck building, or the way the Bandai is choosing to design their cards, where it's just like, oh cool, if you have this particular link at the end game, you get to just take 2 shields, and that's the way that the game ends, right?
I mean, I think that's common design space in card games. Hey, if you play these 2 to 3 cards in this order, you just like kind of create an insurmountable advantage, but the trade-off is that like you have to meet these very specific conditions and play these very specific cards in this very specific order, and so that opens the window for your opponent to disrupt it, or, you know, it could just take too long to assemble for it to happen. So I think that that's a definite possibility, but just given the way we've seen cards designed thus far, I'd be very surprised that became very explicit from Bandai. I think this is more of just a very happy accident of like, these cards do enough that it becomes very identifiable that those win the games. Like, for example, in the ones that we talked about with Unicorn, with Sinanju, like, all those decks still require you to like play the rest of the deck. You know, linking Wing Zero doesn't actually like win you the game on the spot. Your opponent can still just drop 4 cards out of their hand, and if the rest of your deck can't keep up, that Wing Zero doesn't win you the game there, right?
Yeah, I mean, aside from that, you know, I'm taking a look at the deck list one more time. You know, more pings, more ability to control the board. You know, Battle of the Aces being a, you know, kind of good, you know, thread that kind of ties it all together, where you get to ping something that's already been damaged. And of course, there's no shortage of that, you know, in this strategy. Yeah,
being able to turn a Marita unit sideways to ping something for 1 and then immediately follow it up with Battle of Aces, due to the fact that the attack step happens immediately before the action step, means that like you can literally just slap something upside the head for 4 damage, essentially out of nowhere.
Tell me a little bit about the early curve here. Is this just an early curve for the sake of an early curve, where it's like, oh, I gotta play something here? Or do you think there's further application that goes along with this deck strategy? Like, what's going on kind of in the first row of cards on the deck list image?
The majority of it is trying to play value units in the curve, you know, playing appropriate stats. However, we see the beginnings of the pings there, and I tend to find that like, oftentimes just getting damage onto units actually really clears up your play lines, because, you know, the second a unit gets damaged, your opponent becomes very incentivized to essentially just trade it away, because they know, you know, now that it's not at max HP anymore, its time's limited, right? So I need to get my value out of it now. And so just getting that started even before you're linking units is very powerful.
Right. It kind of like does the initial work that's needed for Marita or Kshatriya to finish the job.
Yeah.
So, makes sense. Cool. I went into this knowing not a whole lot about this deck, admittedly, and I'm coming out of this segment feeling like it's good. Sorry, I forgot that we started this segment with good or bad. Your deck is good, pretty good. I feel like a lot of soul gets missing when I'm doing it this way. I'm going back to Danker's Tank next time.
Yeah, Danker's Tank is a much better bid. That's the one we patented.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, do you have any other final words on this deck? You know, perhaps other deck building considerations, you know, problems that you had running the list, you know, yada yada yada, the traditional stuff.
Yeah, the one issue that this deck runs into is if you get too far behind on like tempo/advantage, like, you know, if you start getting behind the curve against a freedom control deck, you could very quickly just run a situation where there is no recovery. You know, you're just permanently behind, your units don't stick, you're not dealing enough ping damage. So like you actively have to manage a board and keep your opponent tamped down, because if it gets away from you, it stays away from you. Welcome back, fellas. It's Fulminatus of Side 9 with a brand new bit for real this time. Today, we're starting a new segment called Rank or Stank, where we ask, is your deck rank or is your deck stank? And my local stinker is here in the studio with me, Reala.
Oh, fuck off. Okay. I guess we should probably have a little bit of context to this deck. I was on a Japan trip recently when Justice Gundam was revealed. I saw the reveal for Justice Gundam and looked at it and said, yeah, this cooked. I had a bowl of ramen noodles shortly afterwards. And I didn't really think about it for that much long after, but I knew that I walked away from reading this card with the impression, hey, it's two attackers. They both get to attack their turn they're played. Good stat line on Justice. Atherin could deal with things on the board if it needs to. Justice seems like a really, really good LR. I was actually thinking that Justice was like maybe the best LR in the entire set, which is probably a bit laughable by today's metrics with a little bit of hindsight. But I tried the absolute best for this deck. This is the upgrade pathway for the Seed Strike deck, and let's just go ahead and talk about it real quick.
I do have to say, I have to speak a little bit in my co-host defense here.
Okay. Thank you.
When Justice was revealed, it was one of the earlier LRs revealed in the set, so we were really thinking of it in the context of like beta, and so thinking in the context of like, oh, we're in that late game point where both of us are in the top deck scenario, and then you just slam down a Justice, link it, and you get two swings immediately and like drastically shorten your opponent's clock. Like, it's really good in that context, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, so right now we're kind of operating in the, I guess, quasi-aggro space that we can talk about, you know, so we have a little bit of an early curve. Of course, we want to be doing shields, because if we have that kind of win state we talked about in the last section where it's like, oh, hey, Banshee destroy Mighty Cruise, and you have 12 cards in drop, oh, cool, you win. That happens here with the Justice Gundam. So you have Justice Gundam, you link Atherin Sayla, you make your token that can attack the turns played, you attack token in case that like the last shield's a base or something, and then if it's not a base, you can just swing Justice for game. That play pattern sounds pretty strong in theory, and granted, if you get to do exactly what I just laid out, yeah, it's awesome. That's magical Christmas land. But of course you gotta get there. You gotta get to a point where your opponent has one shield. Granted, there's an EX base, there's 5 shields that you gotta get rid of, so you know you gotta do some work to, you know, make sure that your work is done in terms of that. So you're on. You may have to help me with the pronunciation. What is it? Is it Xeno? Bino? What is it called?
Xeno.
Xeno. Thank you. I would see. There's a lot of pronunciation discussion right now in the Gundam card game community, and here's live footage of me not being perfect at it either. So Xeno is pretty cool. It is a level 2 cost unit with 2 AP and 1 HP, with the effect being, you know, it cooks. This card cooks. During your turn when this unit is battling an enemy unit that is level 2 or lower, it gains first strike, which of course means that it is dealing damage before the other card has the ability to fight back. So, you know, that means if we're against a vanilla, you know, it takes it out. If we're talking about like Zaku 2 or something, anything that's a 3/2, like a strike dagger, will get eaten by this as well. This is a definitely a good card to have early on. You want to be taking shields. There is a very useful link in Aegis Gundam MA mode with Atherin Sayla that allows you to, one, fight for board while also taking a shield. Unfortunately, we aren't like a straight up aggro deck to where we can just do the thing where we just slam shields and expect not to, you know, have any consequences. We are playing a little bit more board based, but I think I want to emphasize that you're only doing the board based thing when you absolutely have to. So like the MA mode allows you to, you know, still contribute to your strategy of pinging shields while still, you know, attacking base. Aile Strike linked with Kira allows you to do, you know, half removal of the bouncing the card, so they have to rededicate resources to play the card, and then of course Aegis Gundam or Aile Strike Gundam is swinging in at either a base or a shield. And of course you have like other types of removal, so like Witch and the Bride is in this deck. We get to bounce a blocker that's getting in our way of doing the cool Aegis Gundam play. Close combat, we get to, you know, keep some of our units alive from the action timing and pinging down something. Visalius may be exactly what you need to be able to clear base. Garibaldi plus Visalis gets to that breakpoint of the 5 that you see on most bases. Yeah, and so on and so forth. So like that helps us get over on particular things. We have a little rebuild package in here, which I think is kind of cute. I mean, we have, you know, the Kira Yamato, we have the Atherin, and of course we have the Chuchu command / pilot hybrid that also counts as a word pair. So it's like if you want to bounce those, you know, removal spells that you want to be able to clear the board or clear the way on blockers or whatever to be able to swing their shield. That's kind of what that package is there for. Although I will say that's probably the most cuttable aspect of the deck, where if you just want to go full units, you may just be able to go full units with it. But yeah, in testing, this is definitely, it feels like it's the weakest deck that we're featuring here today. And I wanted to put it here just as kind of, you know, for posterity, and also just to show how excited I was for the deck. I don't think that's going to change. This is probably the deck I'm going to foil out. One, because it's probably going to be pretty cheap considering how bad it is. And two, you know, I am a believer in the future design space of this deck. I still think Justice Gundam is a strong card. You know, there is potential for more triple ship alliance tokens and synergy in the future. So I'm not willing to rule this one out exactly yet, but I think this deck probably stands at the bottom of tier 2. There does not seem to be a very strong reason to play this deck other than the fact that, you know, you just like it and want to play it. If you're looking for competitive decks of this format, I'd take a look at the other 5 decks that we featured here today before this Justice deck. But, you know, that's kind of in the mindset where I am with it right now.
So to really dig into it, so obviously through our testing, this deck really struggled to perform. What do you feel like is the biggest thing that holds this deck back? Like what's the biggest thing that keeps it from just succeeding? Because obviously, you know, Justice does read as an extremely strong card.
Yeah, I think the first thing that starts is just there's not a whole lot of filtering to be able to retrieve or get your pilot. We talked about the Unicorn. The Unicorn combo is a full 1 extra card that you need to fulfill that combo, and yet that combo feels easier to fill just because your entire deck is based around filtering. The most filter we got in this deck is Strike Gundam from the start deck. It's also really awkward that because the Atherin link with MA mode is something you want to bridge the gap between your Justice play and your mid game. Well, if you're getting rid of your Atherin, you're getting rid of your Atherin. You have to rely on your other 3 copies of Atherin to either be towards the top, you know, 15-20 cards of your deck, or being in the shield area to get another copy of it, because that's what's needed for the Justice Gundam to do its whole entire play. So I think another Atherin would go a long way, or just a way to retrieve your Atherin, like maybe there's a new Aegis Gundam or some command that allows you to retrieve Atherin, like draw a card or make a token or something. You know, there's a lot of different ways that we can do to patch up some of this deck's weakness. I don't think like the core of the strategy is like inherently broken. I think that this kind of like hybrid between aggro and, you know, light board based synergy, where it's like you play for board when you have to. I think that there is potential for something like this. I just don't think there's potential for something like this with the current card pool. And so I'm looking forward to potential future design space that patches up a bit more of this deck's problems. I think mainly it has to do with just Atherin being so limited.
Do you feel like pursuing the linked Justice essentially just hard locking you into being white-red? Do you feel like that's very constraining on the deck?
Yeah, I think it definitely is constraining because, yeah, it forces you into that, of course. Like, I mean, suppose, for example, Justice linked with Kira would be cooking so unbelievably hard. Kira already goes in our deck. Kira already links with all the other, you know what I mean? But it's Justice Gundam. Links with Atherin, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, being on white-red in particular is a little bit disappointing, especially in the sense that, like, you know, you don't get your cool draw package with rebuild. You don't get, you know, more opportunities to see your links. It's kind of just what's in the top card of your deck and the shields, like I mentioned earlier. And so, yeah, I don't think white-red is the best package for Justice, which is funny because white-red is the only package for Justice. We'll see, but I mean, there's also more, you know, more cards that could come out in the future. You know, like I mentioned, where it's like, yeah, white-red could be the perfect home for this. It's just not the set. You know, it's just not the time for it.
Yeah, comparing it to the only other cross-color link we have in the Banshee Destroy LR, that's more of an incidental, like in the blue-red deck that currently runs it. it's a nice thing to have happen, but it isn't the core of what's driving the deck. Whereas Justice definitely feels like more of a build around. So in some ways, it actually just feels like the deck is way more locked down on what it wants to do.
Yeah, and I will tell you, to those at home watching, don't let this discourage you, at first. I'm sure many of you may take this deck list, play at your local game store, and you'll have a convincing 3-1 record at locals or something. You're just like, yeah, no, this deck doesn't feel inherently that bad. And I think you'd be right to observe that this deck isn't inherently fundamentally broken in the sense that you're doing bad things. It's just the way it all comes together is less, I guess, optimal or less obviously strong than a lot of the other decks that we featured here today. But this deck can hold its own. I just don't from a competitive sense where it's I'm going to a regional tomorrow and I want to lock in a deck. I don't think I would ever go the Justice Gundam route per se. But you can definitely pick up some wins at locals and have some fun with it, especially if you're a Seed fan.
Understandable, but I actually do have one big burning question looking at your list, because you have a big red boy right in the middle of your list, and it's weird to see a Sinanju with no full frontal.
Yeah, I talked about how this deck wants to go for shields. We're not really playing Zeon cards in our deck. We're actually on the Seed version of Zeon, Zaft, as far as I'm aware. So, we're not really on any full frontal synergy, and not like we would even want to be, even if the Zap cards were Zeon necessarily, because we're already at our 8 pilot threshold that we like to talk about. But yeah, I mean, regardless of if it's paired or not, Sinanju can target a shield, it can do some ping damage, so it can kind of do exactly what we wanted it to do, where it's yes, we're still pressuring shields, but we're playing for board a little bit. I cut Sinanju down a little bit just because it has to wait that full turn cycle to be online without the link. But yeah, it seems like Sinanju is actually contributing a little bit more to our game plan than what we'd initially think, given that we are a Zaft Earth Alliance, Triple Ship Alliance type deck rather than a Zeon deck. But yeah, Sinanju is just so good and versatile. I think that we both agree when it comes to that.
And so with that, obviously, we sound a little dour about it, so not to be too pejorative at the deck, but as you were putting it together, was there anything that particularly stood out to you as incredibly difficult with putting the deck together?
This is actually kind of the funniest part about this entire deck. Despite it being the weakest of the bunch, as we've talked about, this is probably the easiest list to settle. There's really not that many other options to really go for. The rest of red is either Zaft or Zeon Synergy. Obviously, we're not going for Zeon Synergy. And Zaft Synergy is just really, really undercooked right now. It's if you ever want to just ruin your day and be a little bit more depressed than you were, go onto the official card list and read all the Zaft cards and go, how do I make a playable list out of this? So I didn't go for the Zaft pile. I think that might be something that patches up this deck in the future. If we make Zaft Synergy, that ends up being good, because of course our MA mode is still Zaft and some of our early curve is still Zaft. So that could be a potential avenue to make this deck better in the future, depending on the cards they print. But yeah, it's to me, this deck just kind of feels like you're including all your good white cards, which includes Justice, by the way. Justice isn't that bad. Justice is still a good white card by most players' metrics. You take the red cards that you have to play, like Atherin, for example, and you take the red cards that are pretty good in slot, like the MA mode and Sinanju and close combat and things like that. And you put them all together and you go yeah, this is a deck. And you play it and you're yeah, this is a deck. And that's kind of where we end up with it.
It do be a pile of 50 cards.
It do be a pile, and I'm gonna play it, and I'm not gonna be ashamed about it. Okay.
Hey,
I'm gonna have some fun.
We might be talking about breakdowns and viability and all that stuff, but at the end of the day, one of the true joys of card games is playing with cards you like.
Yep, I like Justice. I still think he cooks.
It is undoubtedly a cool card.
Yeah.
All right, with that, looking at your list, looking at its performance, I might have been picking on you earlier, but at the end of the day, playing cards you love, I gotta say, that makes your deck dank.
Yes! Alright, so that's all the deck lists that we have for you today on, the slightly sore note of the Justice Gundam being less good than what I anticipated. We actually have 2 more lists that we're not going to talk about today, but they do cook for the early format, so definitely keep your eyes peeled. And make sure to check Side 9 for future videos that are going to be uploaded to the channel.
And that's all for this video. We're Side 9, and we'll see you next mission.